was a southern block, I was also in attendance.
Duly noted. Thank you. Doug.
Mr. Chairman, I'm covering you for this meeting right now. I'm going to sign you in to make sure they don't miss you.
Yeah, we're looking a little lonely over there in the Northeast, isn't it, Doug? Okay, if there's no further comments, consider the proceedings approved. Are there any public comments for items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to turn it right over to Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go through the river herring conservation plan. I have a short presentation on it. Just as some background, in August of 2013, following the 2012 benchmark stock assessment, the NOAA Fisheries announced the listing of river herring under the Endangered Species Act was neither threatened nor endangered, as either threatened or endangered was not warranted. Also following that announcement, NIMS and ASMFC announced that they would be working together to try to coordinate a coast-wide effort to essentially identify some of the major data gaps that were highlighted in that assessment, as well as try to create a dynamic conservation plan that would guide restoration efforts for river herring. So the board was sent on April 22nd the draft conservation plan, both in a Word document form and the web page. We were seeking any comments or edits or feedback that the board might have at that point. I will reiterate at the end of my presentation, but if there were any comments that you did have and you wanted to share, just to let me know after I'm done presenting. So in follow-up to that announcement of a partnership between NOAA and ASMFC, NOAA Fisheries sought out experts to help identify some of these data gaps, as well as address threats that are posed to river herring currently, everything from habitat to fishing effort concerns. And so these experts were formed together in what is known as the Technical Expert Working Group, the TUG, and they're comprised of approximately 87 representatives across state agencies, federal agencies, the Council and Commission, Native American tribes, U.S. and Canadian academia, environmental groups, U.S. and Canadian fishing and hydropower industries, as well as recreational interests. At this point, we haven't had any additional communication with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, but that's a goal moving forward for the TUG. And again, the hope was that these experts would be able to help with really identifying where there were the needs to fill in data gaps that were identified in that 2012 benchmark stock assessment. Just in giving again this background of the TUG, the way it works is that the TUG is broken up into these subgroups. There's the fisheries subgroup, the species interaction subgroup, habitat, genetics, hybrid, landlocked subgroup, stock status subgroup, and climate change. And each of these groups meet to discuss specific research needs within each of these topics and make a recommendation, or essentially provide information to the TUG through this an intermediary committee called the Ecosystem Integration Committee. And then this Ecosystem Integration Committee is comprised of the chairs of each of those subgroups. In collating that information and bringing it forward to the entire TUG, overall it's been a process to work up from the ground essentially and identify where the most relevant needs are moving forward. In taking those issue areas and breaking out more where the research needs are and current kind of lay of the land. The TUG has helped inform this conservation plan over the last few months. And as I said, it was provided to the board in a Word document to ease the ability of providing feedback and review, but it will be made live to the public in a web page. And so as a web page, it can be updated regularly. And the conservation plan has, in essence, about 5 different areas that it will be highlighting to people. First is the coastwide perspective. Second is ongoing management and monitoring. The third is the plan components, which really brings it back to what the subgroups of the TUG have been meeting and discussing. And then research and conservation efforts, and lastly, some of the conclusions and implementation that's currently ongoing. So I was going to walk through each of these tabs briefly so that the board is aware of what each section kind of deals with. As I said, the first is the coastwide perspective. This in that document that was shared with you guys is pages 5 through 7, and it really gives an overview of the species range for alewife and blueback herring, while highlighting some of the big threats that river herring sees across the coast, including climate change, dams that block or impede access to spawning and nursery habitat, poor water quality, predation, and fishing efforts. The second tab, ongoing management and monitoring, just really gives a lay of the land of what some of the main federal statutes that are in place, how monitoring is broken down at the state level, in part through the commission's process, as well as the sustainable fishing plans that are in place. Those are on pages 8 through 16. The next is, as I said before, the plan components, which comprises pages 17 through 30, and really brings back a link to each of the TUG subgroups where the topics of stock status, habitat, climate change, fisheries, species interactions, genetics, outreach, and ecosystem considerations are delved into a little bit more. Next is the research and conservation needs, which is pages 31 through 48, and this section provides more of an extensive overview of some of the current research and conservation efforts that are ongoing by local, state, and federal actors. What's also highlighted here is some of the recent research awards that were mentioned earlier this year. One was in Barnegat Bay and Raritan River, and the other was a partnership with Mass DMF and UC Santa Cruz. And these are on pages 31 through 48, I think, as I said. And then lastly, in the section conclusions and looking forward, pages 49 through 52, this section reiterates some of the work that's currently underway to assist river herring conservation and habitat restoration. In this section, this really walks through some of the funding opportunities that are also available for states to consider. And while NOAA currently doesn't have an open and active grant for 2015 or FY 2016 at this point, one of the things that I wanted to highlight to the board was that there are other funding opportunities that states could pursue, such as NIFWIF's River Herring Program is currently accepting proposals for their fall 2015 RFP. And that RFP pre-proposal essentially is due June 2nd, and it needs to be submitted by then for an invitation to submit a full grant proposal in August of this year. Other opportunities that I wanted to bring to the board's attention were the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership in conjunction with the National Fish Habitat Partnership that U.S. Fish and Wildlife administers a grant through, which has a funding opportunity that will be available later this year that deals specifically with habitat restoration, but has yet to be announced. A third one that's of import is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's National Coastal Wetlands program that also has a grant process that has RFPs open through June 24th. And the last one was one that you all should be familiar with, which is the Fish Passage program that will be having an RFP process later this year. So in providing kind of a summary of some of the main things that board members should consider moving forward from the conservation plan, there are a number of research and restoration funding opportunities. As I said, the NIFWIF Fall 2015 herring program pre-proposals are due June 2nd. ACFIP and the National Fish Habitat program's funding cycle will be for the fall 2015, but that date has yet to be finalized. And then the National Wetlands Conservation Grant has a program where RFPs are due June 26. If states have any questions about this and would like to get some more information or help, or have some help with coordination or reaching out to their local U.S. Fish and Wildlife office, staff is willing to provide additional communication and support as needed. Another note that comes out of the conservation plan that will be touched on shortly by Dr. Drew is a recommendation from the technical committee for a data collection standardization meeting later this year that would involve technical committee members from all the states as well as federal partners. And lastly, that as I mentioned earlier, the conservation plan will be available online soon, and if there's any comments or feedback that the board would like to offer before it goes live, really the last set of comment period before it goes live was for the board to provide any feedback. Once I've heard from board members, or if there is no additional feedback, it will be made available to the public shortly. And we also have with us today Kim Damon Randall from NOAA Fisheries to answer any additional questions people might have about some of the ongoing work between NOAA and ASMFC in trying to look at funding in the coming years. So with that, I'll take any questions board members have at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kirby. Are there any questions or comments on the TUG conservation plan? Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kirby, for your presentation. I'm just wondering, does the River Herring Technical Expert Working Group receive any operational funds, you know, to fund its structure and operation, or is it just based on the participation of employees of the various agencies and groups and so forth that make it up?
I'll take a stab at answering that, and then maybe Kim might be able to give you some more clarity. My understanding is there is not any operational budget currently for the TUG. It's really done on the volunteer basis of the states and staff to help coordinate it at this point.
Kim's nodding her head. You have anything else to add, Kim? Bill.
Thank you, Kirby. When you say plan will be available soon, now we deal with plans and then there's plans and then there's plans. This particular thing that's coming out, what is it? It's a conservation plan, which it isn't a fisheries management plan, right?
That is correct, Mr. Adler. It is a plan in the sense that it outlines really a lay of the land of where there is the current ability for management at the federal, state, and local level, where there's monitoring programs at the state level, where there are research and funding opportunities, and where there could be additional partnerships in the future. But there is no components currently in the same way that we have our fishery management plans.
Yeah, Leroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kirby, for your report. I might have missed this, but did you give a date for when you'd like comments from board members?
It was mentioned when we submitted the conservation plan in a Word document to the board that we were seeking comments ahead of the board meetings, which is today, May 6th. So unless there are any other additional comments that the board wanted to provide at this point, we were not planning to extend the comment period beyond today.
Kim?
I was just going to add that once the plan goes live on the website, we still have the opportunity to change it, and it's very much supposed to be an adaptive management plan, so if you don't meet today's deadline, we still have the opportunity to make changes to the plan.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kirby. The intention then of, I guess you, Kirby, or ASMSD would be to follow through on searching out funding for all of the areas that you discussed. You had a list of 4 or 5. One you had would have been applied for by June 2nd. So has funding been requested from them also? And what kind of money are we talking about? And in terms of, has this group envisioned what it's going to take, roughly? $100,000, a number of some kind. Look on the cover, it looks like it turned out to be quite an expansive, dedicated effort that might require 1 or 2 or more technical people. So can you flesh it out just a little more for us?
Sure. So in the research and habitat restoration funding opportunities that I was highlighting, those are just a short list of ones where the deadlines are on the horizon. They're coming up in the next few months. The conservation plan has a dedicated page that lists all of the different granting opportunities, and it, as Kim had mentioned before, the goal is for this to be a dynamic website that can be updated, and as part of what staff is trying to provide to the TUG and turn the board is the ability to offer the board these notices and highlight where they can seek out funding at the state level and where possible, possibly collaborative funding. The range of funds vary depending on the agency that's granting it. I know the National Fish and Wildlife, NIFWIF, their grants vary between between $10,000 and $100,000, whereas some of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife grants also have dramatic ranges, sometimes just a few $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars. So there's not one set amount that any of these specific grants are speaking to. So,
Doug?
I'm all set.
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So obviously, this plan came out of a significant effort on both the part of the commission, the councils, various other experts to address the challenges of management of these species across multiple jurisdictions and to address some of the long-standing problems that confront us that extend beyond the things that we can control through this body. And so as such, it doesn't actually have any regulatory teeth. It provides a portal for interested management organizations to coordinate and collaborate on meeting different data gaps, data needs, one-stop shop for finding funding resources, things like that. So, I read through the document, and I didn't see, and perhaps I just need to visit the website a little bit more, but is there a future evaluation of how well this collaborative, non-regulatory type effort is working? So in other words, are we going to go back and examine sort of this conservation plan after, 4 years, I don't know, something like that, to see how well we're doing with regard to meeting some of these challenges?
Kim?
Sure. So yes, basically we started, NOAA Fisheries talked to ASMSC and started this effort because when we made the listing determination, we recognized that there were a lot of data gaps and a lot of uncertainties. So we had committed at that time that we made the listing determination that we would be revisiting the species within 3 to 5 years. So the whole idea is to be implementing these proactive conservation efforts and to be addressing the data gaps so that we can look at the species again, hopefully tied to a new stock assessment possibly, which would be ideal because that will give us a lot of information that we can rely on, as well as what's going on with the TUG and the proactive conservation plan. So it will be continually assessed as we move through the process.
All set? Michelle?
And it's really just one more comment, and it's based on that last summary slide that Kirby had up there about the, I think it was the evaluation of the the data collection standardization meeting later this year. So I guess I would just encourage that at that meeting, I mean, I think almost everyone sitting around this table, all states and jurisdictions expend a pretty significant amount of resources in monitoring these species, and if there are, and yet we also have our sustainable fishery plans, which contain management targets and triggers and thresholds. And in North Carolina, we hit one of our management thresholds and had to ratchet back harvest of American shad, which I'm happy to say we've it's worked. And we're moving forward from there. But if there are surveys that are simply not being used, then we need to know that. We need to eliminate them. I mean, just in this economic climate, the states and jurisdictions don't have the resources to continue monitoring efforts that are not helping to inform future stock assessments. So.
Any other questions or comments for Kirby? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Kirby. We're turning over the TC report from Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So unfortunately, Shanna stole some of my thunder today at the policy board meeting when we discussed this, but in case you were not there or were not paying attention, I will just briefly go over the TC's recommendations for the assessment schedule for shad and river herring. We recommend an assessment update for shad in 2017. That will be basically 10 years after the last benchmark, and there has not really been anything in between there. The TC is open to the idea of potentially a benchmark at that point, but we're not optimistic that data has improved to the point where we could offer new analyses or basically do anything better than the last benchmark did. So as we go through the data collection process, we will evaluate the quality of the data, any new data sources that could support new or better analyses, and if a benchmark is warranted, we would recommend that to the board. But at the moment, we're recommending an assessment update for shad in 2017, and then an assessment update for river herring, which would be a 5-year assessment update, which is what we recommended coming out of the last benchmark, to do an update in 5 years, and then another benchmark for river herring in 10 years. We anticipate that the shad assessment process will also allow us to gather river herring data at the same time. There's a lot of the same data sources being used in both, so hopefully we can do the data gathering process fairly coordinated way between the two species, and then just do the update for shad in 1 year and the update for river herring in the next. So the other issue that we discussed is related to what Kirby just brought up, which is this river herring data collection and standardization meeting. So this is a product of some of the recommendations from the last benchmark assessment, the discussions of the technical expert working group, and the discussions of the TC members who participate in both the TC and some people are also part of the TUG, where we recommend putting together this workshop to establish sort of standard methodology for data collection for shad and river herring, mostly river herring, on the Atlantic coast, and also to sort of evaluate the current data and current data collection methodology. The TC and I think the TUG also felt that this is kind of sort of the best compromise between something that can improve the available data in a short time frame with minimal input of extra money, and still provide something of value that would be helpful for the assessment update going forward. So the goals are to kind of provide sort of a set of best practices for river herring data collection on the Atlantic coast, and in a way that is both to frame it both in terms of what can you do to standardize your surveys now, not changing, not creating new surveys, but given the available data collection, what can you do to make those programs as effective and standardized as possible to make it easier to compare data across states and regions, and to make sure that we're getting the most use out of money that you've already dedicated to this monitoring, which is sort of the baseline minimum. And then on top of that, I think we'd also like to discuss the question of what is the ideal, that if we had money, or if we could access money through some of these funding opportunities, what would be the best practices to make sure that those programs starting up are consistent, standardized, and easily understood and shared across the coast. So those would be the goals of that meeting, and the technical committee recommends having this meeting and participating in this meeting.
Thank you. Short and sweet. Questions for Katie? Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sounds exciting, Kate. Can we budget this, or will it be budgeted, Bob or Tony?
Tony?
Yep. Pat, we budgeted for a day and a half meeting, so any additional time we would need to find funds in the budget for that. That was our original intention, and we're working with NOAA to see if they can find additional funds in the budget to, in particular, get NOAA folks at the meeting, because the Commission is not allowed to pay for our federal partners to come to meetings, as well as I think we're looking for some Canadian individuals, and I'll let Kim fill in any additional pieces here.
Yeah, I'll follow on, Mr. Chairman. It sounds like a pretty straightforward request, and the presentation was pretty clear. When you're ready for a motion, it sounds like we need to make a motion on the developing or setting up a committee requirements. So let's have discussion around the table if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll call a motion.
Kim, do you have anything to add to Tony's narrative?
Sure. So we are definitely going to have some funds that we can put towards the workshop, and we might have some additional funds that could be used after the workshop if there's something that needs to be done to kind of follow on from the results of the workshop. We're still working through our final budget numbers, but we should have some definite funds for the workshop.
Any other questions for Katie? Yeah, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to find out from Katie about the standardization. So are you talking about looking at information that already exists from the states and trying to make sure that the sampling or the collections over time and in space are optimal in terms of standardization that way, or are you talking about something else?
So yes, number one, I think making sure that, what you are doing actually achieves the goal of what your sampling project is trying to determine, but also doing things like making sure that if people are taking run counts, you can compare those run counts across different rivers, because not everybody's using the same methodology. Or if you're sampling your harvest, making sure you're collecting the same types of information on the biology of the fish. If you're doing a young of year survey, is everybody using similar methods to calculate the index, to do the sampling and things like that, so that when you compare across states or across programs, those results are as consistent and comparable as possible.
Before I go to Pat, are there any other questions? Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the board task the technical committee with setting up and conducting meeting on data collection and standardization. Do you need any more than that? For river herring and shad. About river herring and shad. That makes a complete statement.
I think we'll dress it up for you. Is there a second? Doug. Second by Doug Kraut.
Mr. Chairman, did you want to add shad and river herring to that to make it complete, or is it just inferred?
Staff's good with that motion. You okay with your motion, Pat?
It's fine, it's inferred, it's for this.
Okay, is there an objection to the motion on the board? Oh, you need me to read it. Okay, sorry, Joe. Move that the board task the TC with conducting a meeting on data collection and standardization. Motion made by Mr. Augustine and seconded by Mr. Grout. Is there an objection to the motion on the board? Seeing none, the motion carries. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like we need another motion on recommending that the American Shad be added to the assessment schedule. Is that going to be an issue or a problem, or can we do that, Tony?
We are okay on the assessment schedule, Pat. That was approved by the policy board this morning. So
Okay. I
it's just
wasn't
by
there, so
default
I
of
didn't
the
know.
order of the meetings that this.
Okay, so it won't
Came
require
up.
a motion for
But
the
thank
second
you.
part.
Is there any further business to come before the Shad River? Michelle, I thought you wanted to get out early.
I do, but just really quickly, I just want to update everyone on the status of North Carolina's river herring fishery management plan. We previously had a discretionary river herring set aside just around the 4 days of the herring festival around Easter, with the effective date of Amendment 2 to our fishery management plan, which took effect on May 1st. That discretionary harvest has been eliminated. You know, one of the goals of having that was to provide some data for our management of the fishery, and it was simply not meeting that need, so we've eliminated it. And we'll be updating our SFU accordingly.
Thank you. So unless there's any further business to come before the board, this meeting is adjourned.